So we have this spectrum, and the question is, does this team that we are seeing here now, let's say this is a potential team, 12 of you, no, 6 of you have been voting. So would this be a team that could work effectively in the wandering phase, in a wandering context, in a Genesis context? What would you say?
I guess we're visiting town planners, maybe.
Yeah. So in this phase, you would need maybe some more artists. So it would be good to have a bit more artists and a bit more pioneers. There's a bit too many settlers for this phase here. And okay, you always need a town planner also in this phase, of course, because somebody needs to take care of the formalities around things like purchase orders or assignments or stuff like that. Mm. But so this team would maybe be not super good in this phase. What would we do? We would maybe try to hire people that are a bit more leaning toward artistry and pioneering, right? What about the finding phase? So now we want to work agile and we want to find our way. What would you say?
Too many artists.
Too many artists. Maybe a bit less artists and a bit more pioneers in this phase. The amount of settlers might be quite okay. So overall, yeah, it's not totally off, but it could be improved, right? Then on the optimizing, now when we go towards lean, would that be a good constellation for a lean context?
Yes, we have plenty of settlers, right?
We have quite some preference towards settling, but not maybe enough for town planning. I mean, yeah, you have some people in there, and we have definitely too many artists for this kind of context. They would go crazy with all the rules and order that we are trying to create. They would maybe want to go off and work with the next generation product or something like this. Yeah, and then in a Six Sigma context, of course, we need much more town planners and settlers, and much less pioneers and artists. Yeah. So, yeah, play around with this. This is a super simple to set up survey in Mentimeter. You can. I've done this with my free license of Mentimeter. It's super easy to set up, and it provides a great tool to start discussing with your team. Do we have the right balance and the right preferences? Yeah. So that's a super little tool, and that is helpful in this context. Yeah, challenges and ways of working. So maybe a thing we can play is also how do you go about certain things? What way of working challenges do we have? And I will my God, the computer is super slow as long as I'm sharing the screen. Let's share it like this. So let's say let's play a little bit. So let's say let's say sprint planning. Where in the spectrum would you place sprint planning? Is it more here, or how much predictability do we have? How much are we exploring? How much is sprint planning about ideas? Where in the spectrum would you place this?
Hendrick, can you do a zoom in because it's complicated to read it?
It's too small.
It's perfect now. I don't know if you have 2 screens. If you have 2 screens, you can share one screen in presentation mode and do the modifications in another one. PowerPoint is now doing that live, which is awesome, by the way.
Yes, I could do that. Let me see. Yeah, what you mean is this. I'm sharing my screen. And
yeah,
then I can...
and you can do the changes in the second one.
Yeah, it's not quite as real time as the other one, but yeah, that works. So yeah, so what do you think? Where would you put the sprint planning in the spectrum?
I guess sprint planning is a little bit about choosing items that are already explored. So maybe it would be a little where it is, or maybe a little bit to the right. Although it's an agile practice, but it's a part that it's already been
Lean, maybe? No?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, I offer.
So actually, sprint planning is pretty much a question of optimizing. I think you're trying to optimize what you can do in a sprint. So sprint planning somehow belongs there, and that's like, as an agilist, you might say, but wait a second. Yeah, but sprint planning is a practice that is just there, and you can actually use lean thinking. How do we optimize, and how can we optimize the way we go about the sprint plan? What about backlog refinement or backlog grooming? Where would you put that? Is that also here, or is it here?
I don't think it's in there, because backlog grooming, it's not exploring, right?
I guess it's a little bit about exploring, but in a limited state, because you are exploring something that already exists, like drilling down. So I guess it would be on the agile, on finding.
Finding, yeah.
So you're refining and so on. Yeah. Then I have here this example of continuous integration environment, CI pipeline, and let's say running a CI pipeline. Where in the spectrum would you put that?
CI stand for?
Continuous integration, sorry. Yeah.
Maximizing, I guess, because it's sort of an idea of a factory delivering stuff recursively.
Yeah.
Agree.
Soon, but
What did you say? Okay, there was somebody saying something. I could get it.
Between optimizing and maximizing, for sure, I would say.
Mm-hmm. So it's maybe somewhere here in this spectrum, going actually deeply into maximize, because once it's running, you don't want this to be disturbed. Okay, so we had a number of examples of different practices, and I don't know, do you want some more? Should we try some more? Do you have one that you would like to place there somewhere?
Sprint review?
Sprint review, yeah, let's see. So where would you place that? Is it a question of optimizing, finding, or maximizing?
Maximizing, maybe.
Optimizing, right?
Oh, well,
Yeah, it's somewhere maybe here in this part of the spectrum.
I would say yes.
Yeah. What about the sprint retrospective?
The same.
That's an interesting question, because what are you trying to achieve there? It's a question of optimizing, maybe that's what you're after, but the retrospective itself, it wants to achieve an optimization, but the retrospective itself.
In the retrospective, what we are trying to optimizing is future works, right? Yeah, maybe.
Well, the focus is the team, or it's more the people than the idea. Like, it's not content.
So in a sprint retrospective, what you're doing is you're actually wondering about what have we seen, and where should we go next, and finding out what could we do. So the goal is optimizing, but the sprint retrospective itself, it's a relatively creative event. Yeah, you want to have different perspectives, and you want to see different things. So there you can actually, when you run a sprint retrospective, you can look into the toolboxes that you find from design thinking in Agile.
A tool like failure mode effect analysis, FMEA, that is a lean tool.
Okay, but that
and actually we are finding new
in a different way.
topics to improve.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think it's a different dimension, because what we're talking about on the bottom is more the ideas and the product and the project, and the retrospective is on the people. Like it's how we interact. So it's unless you consider the people as a product, but I don't think we should mix those dimensions. At least I don't see the retrospective touching the ideas, like how you work the ideas, but not the idea, the actual idea. So you're not going to.
In a sprint retrospective, what are you doing? You're trying to understand what is going on, what have we found, and what can we do better, right?
Yes, but in the perspective of, like, if we were a team, I would be checking how we can work generically better, not on a particular idea, not on a particular thing. And on the another part, like, for example, the reviews or the plannings, it's all content. It's all about how we manage the project or the product, right? How do we improve the product? So we're talking about two different things.
That's true.
And
one thing is what we want to achieve with the thing, and the other thing is in which context are we when we are doing it.
Yeah.
So, for example, a sprint retrospective is in the context of wandering finding, but the goal of the sprint retrospective is optimizing in the end. You get the difference?
Yeah, I agree with you. We are finding new ways or what occurs not so good, and finding new ways to improve it, to optimize or maximize the efficiency.
Yeah, but it's a creative event where we are creating ideas to optimize and maximize.
Yes, so, and you are creating knowledge as well, maybe.
Yes. Exactly. So you're building knowledge, you're creating ideas and want to build them into knowledge around. And that's why sprint retrospectives are rather here. The sprint review is indeed, a sprint review is a cadence thing, and you're looking at the product. So there is not so much wondering, it's more like optimizing. What have we learned now? And is there any surprises now coming in? So a sprint review is more on the right-hand side of the spectrum. Yeah. So it's not what is the goal of the thing, it's about in which context does it take place. Okay, maybe to move a little bit on, let's talk a little bit about risk management, because this is another interesting thing to talk about. So classic risk management, I don't know, some of you have maybe had a project management education and so on, and a typical thing I learned is the risk level is probability times impact. But there's one big problem with this. And that problem is it's a knowledge problem. You need to know the thing to determine its probability and its impact. But when you don't know it, you cannot determine that. Yeah? So there is an issue around knowledge and awareness that we need to be clear on. So you have, maybe some of you have seen this scheme already before, the famous unknown unknowns. That's a quote by Donald Rumsfeld. I think it was in the Iraq War, where he said, oh, there are so many unknown unknowns. So there is things that are known and things that are unknown. And there is things what we are aware of and things we are not aware of. So there are things we know, we are aware that we know them. And there is things we are aware that we do not know them. And here is where probability times impact, for example, is a helpful tool. We know this could go wrong, or this is a question we haven't answered yet. So this is where this kind of risk management approach works. But the unknown knowns, we are not aware of that our organization knows a certain thing. That's a tricky thing, right? And even worse, the unknown unknowns, things we simply cannot know, things that will cause a surprise. So how do you do risk management around these things? So for that, let's explore this a little bit. So how do the unknown unknowns actually evolve over time? So what would you say? The unknown unknowns, are they high when we start here on the left-hand side of the spectrum? Do we have many unknown unknowns, or is it few unknown unknowns? What would you say? Is it many or is it few unknown unknowns here?
Many.
Many, right. So what we would say is there's a lot of unknown unknowns, and then at the end of the wondering phase on design thinking, are there less unknown unknowns or are there still many?
Less, I hope.
Yeah. So the whole goal of the thing is that you reduce, you're seeking surprises. That's what design thinking is about. You're seeking surprises. You want to get as many surprises cleared out before you start heavy investing into prototyping. Yeah. So that's that. And then how does it continue, the unknown unknowns? While we are finding with agile ways of working, how do the unknown unknowns evolve up to the right-hand side of the spectrum?
They are going down progressively.
Yeah, they're going down progressively. And in Six Sigma, you assume we don't have any left, right?
After Six Sigma, yes, normally.
So what's actually happening is what you want is something like this. Yeah, you want to eat as many unknown unknowns very early, and then gradually you eat them up by continuously learning in Agile and Lean. Mm. What about the known unknowns? How many known unknowns do you have in the beginning of design thinking, and how many do you have in the middle, and how many do you have in the end? What would you say? Where does it start?
I guess it starts low because we are discovering.
Mm-hmm.
It goes up,
Mm-hmm.
and then on the agile, on the finding phases, it goes down.
Yeah. So it's a bit like the known unknowns that they maybe we have some unknowns in the beginning, so we don't start from zero. But then actually this is about learning what we don't know, and then you are finding your way how to reduce the known unknowns up to somewhere here where you say, okay, now we have eaten it all up, we have found the recipe, and we know everything. Yeah. And what about the known knowns? How do they evolve over the spectrum?
At the beginning, you got a few because you know something.
Yeah, you know something,
Not
and then you learn.
When you learn.
And they grow, right?
Yeah, so somehow it's like very simplistic. It goes up all the time. You are building more and more knowledge along the journey. Okay, very good. So this is the way how the unknown unknowns develop, and the known unknowns and the known knowns. If I go to the next slide, this is how we go about stuff then. So if the unknown unknowns, we eat them up, we get a lot of known unknowns and known knowns. Yeah. By the way, here on the unknown unknowns, I made this little peep. Do you know what I want to say with that?
It's when you get something you didn't expect.
Yeah.
You get surprised.
This is the moment of disruption. You're in your Six Sigma repeatedly doing the same thing, and all of a sudden you don't know that you don't know. So something is there, disruption happens, and then your organization breaks down. That's why it's never a better idea to be in a pure Six Sigma state. You always need to retrospect and be on your toes. Yeah, but a good way to deal with this from a risk management point of view on the left-hand side of the spectrum is because it's unplannable, you have agility itself to deal with risk. So agile practices are in themselves actually a risk mitigation strategy. And that's the thing what many people don't understand. Agile is actually about risk mitigation also. It's not just an efficient way of working, it's also an effective way of working to reduce risk. And then here in the middle, you have mitigation plans. Yeah? So there you have probability times impact. Whatever you have found, you can do a mitigation plan. If this goes wrong, this is what we are doing. Maria, can you mute, because there is some noise coming from your side.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're speaking. Yeah, and then on the right-hand side of the spectrum, it's in the Six Sigma, you have action plans. You know, if this is happening, this is what we are going to do. And again, it's often not either or. As you go along the spectrum, you have some things that you can still cover in an agile way, where you simply don't know the unknown unknowns. But for some things that you know, you can start making mitigation plans. So when you're working in an agile team, you can start making mitigation plans already. You don't have to completely stick without them through the journey. No. So it's a gradual journey as well. Okay, does that make sense? Good. Yeah, then, yeah, what's on the backlog? That's another interesting question. So let's say you're a product owner. What is on your backlog when you are working in the wondering phase and design thinking? That's an interesting question. So what would you say? What's there?
Well, you have users, or you have at least a human. Let's start with that.
We have a human, yeah. But I mean, a backlog is basically a list of things that need to be done or need to be taken care of. So what would you take care of in a design thinking phase? And what would you prioritize there?
I guess you have a vision of very broad matters to inspect.
Vision.
You have to frame the problem first.
Framing. You need to frame the problem, and when you frame the problem, you need to find out: have I understood the problem? Yeah.
Yes.
So here, what you have maybe is something like learning gaps are on your backlog. We haven't understood this, and experiments, and maybe customer investigations. Yeah. So those are the kind of things that are on the backlog in this early stage. What's on the backlog when you're when you are working agile? Okay, that's your home turf. You know.
You have refined items and not refined items, like epics, features, up to test.
Epics, user stories, features, and all this stuff. Yeah, really true. What about the lean phase? What's on the backlog in a lean phase? Think about that. You know,
deliverables like this. Sorry.
You want to optimize. That's the goal of the lean. Sorry.
Retrospectives.
Retrospectives. Yes.
Processes to be optimized.
Yeah.
Really?
So it's things like improvements are, for example, on the backlog list in an optimization phase. So what can we do better? Automation items.
Do release plans belong here, or does it make sense?
release plans. Actually, I think release plans you might have here. I mean, this is okay. This is a huge topic, Marcio. When do you have a roadmap and how to communicate a roadmap? So, what are the release plans and so on? Often we have release plans already in the earlier stages, but we need to be super cautious about those because there is so many things we haven't understood. So when you're still in the finding phase, you might have a release plan, but everything looks very indicative there, probably. So when you talk to your customer, you are a bit cautious with making promises.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Feedback from users. Yeah, that's a good one. Yes. To optimize. Quality improvements. And so on. Yeah, good stuff. All right. Yeah, and what's on the list on Six Sigma? Do you have a product owner in Six Sigma? Then you have maybe more a project manager, right?
Planning.
Maybe they would have.
Yeah. There you just have the plan. There's actually not a backlog. You know what you want to do, and you have your plan and your strategy to realize the thing. And what's on your plan is all these materials and resources and all this stuff.
And concretization rates or KPIs, we can put it here, right?
KPIs too, and the dashboard is helping you there to see where we are and so on. I mean, dashboards, of course, you have also in a lean context. In a lean context, you start measuring a lot because here things became measurable. Often in an agile context, you can measure only so much, but there are so many things you cannot measure because there's so many unknown unknowns, right? When you have unknown unknowns, you cannot quantify them, right? Okay, good. Yeah, maybe a last thing that we can play around with is financial handling, because I think somebody asked that in the Q&A session, and let's explore this a little bit. So when we say we have our different contexts and we have our value creation approach and our risk management approaches, how would the budgeting approach look like on the left-hand side of this spectrum? How would you go about budgeting? And those of you who were in the Q&A, they maybe remember what I said there. Do you know a budgeting approach on the left-hand side?
Beyond budgeting.
Almost.
But okay,
Yeah.
is practically you review constantly the project, the assignment of the money, depending on the outcomes, and if it works, is relevant for the customer, you move the money where needed, and you abort the project that are not interesting.
So the beyond budgeting is something that fits more into the middle ground here. On the left-hand side, you have pretty much venture capital. Because how much money do you give into this thing? There is so much unplannable stuff. You actually make a bet, and that's really how it is. It's so unpredictable that it's more, you need to invest into an experiment here. And what you pay for is actually learning in the end. So here you have a venture capital approach. In the middle, you have pretty much beyond budgeting. Do you know what beyond budgeting is about? It's budgeting in an agile way. So you don't have a fixed frame once a year. You don't make once a year you make a frame, but you constantly do financial planning. You do this on a monthly cadence, and you are flexible in rerouting money to where it's absolutely needed. So you shift your investments very, very fast, and you're not like only at the end of the year you say how much budget you will have for the next year. And there's a bit of a shift in thinking. On the right-hand side, where you have classic budgeting with frames and forecasts and so on, there your question is, does the new investment fit into my frame? And here you have more the question, does it make sense to do it? So with every little decision, do we invest into this epic? Do we invest into this user story? Does it make sense? That's the questions you answer. And when the answer is yes, then you invest. On the right-hand side, you know already, you have a fixed frame for the thing. And then it's more like, does it fit into the frame or not? Yeah, that's the difference between the two. Some tools around this. So when you are on the left-hand side, when you think in venture capital and you have agility there, here actually the practice of NABC value propositions is really, really good. And those of you who have listened to Kurt Carlson, he's a really great guy. I think he really nailed this. I've been a big fan of the business model canvas for many years, and Kurt once annoyed me with saying that, but business model canvases are not a value creation method. And he's absolutely right with that. But through the discussions with him, I came to the conclusion that what I don't like actually is the value proposition canvas from Alex Osterwalder. That's actually the thing that's not helpful. That I would replace with NABC. NABC is the much better framework for finding value propositions because it has a C like competition and alternatives thing, and that is completely missing in Alex Osterwalder's value proposition canvas. So competition is important. So NABC as a value proposition, and then the business model canvas for getting an overview about the business that you want to do. That's a great combination, I think, to think here. And then, of course, design thinking, user research are really great approaches to get an orientation of what needs to be done. So that would be, for me, a sort of minimal set of tools that can be used here. Yeah, and then in the middle ground, when you now want to think a budgeting point of view. Okay, so first of all, beyond budgeting is doing a split between targets, forecast, and resource allocation. So those of you who have been working or dealing with beyond budgeting know that. So basically, the whole thing is about three main questions. What do we want to happen? What do we think will happen? And what is needed to make it happen? Those are the three big questions that need to be answered. And in classic budgeting, the three questions are answered by only one process. And that has some disadvantages when you're in an agile context, because what we want to happen and what we think will happen are very distant from each other, probably. So what you do here is, what we want to happen, the target, we want to capture the whole market with our wonderful product. And this is what we are striving for. That's our bold ambition. That's our target. But our forecast is saying what we think will happen. Yeah, maybe we can't capture the whole market because we have understood our competitors and the market is a bit shaky at the moment. So what we think will happen is that and that. And then the resource allocation comes and says, okay, seeing what we would like to happen, what we think will happen, what do we resource-wise invest into? So beyond budgeting splits the three. When you combine the three, you create a big problem, because I've seen this in our company. When you combine, for example, the targets and the forecast, what you want to happen and what you think will happen. What you want to happen, when it becomes a goal, your target, your bonus is related to what you would like to happen, then you are actually gamifying the whole thing. Then people will not have bold ambitions anymore. They will play it safe because their bonuses is related to it. And that's actually not helpful. So if you want to boldly go where nobody has gone before, then you better split this up and you say, this is our bold ambition. And what the bonus that's paid for, that is for outperforming maybe the competition or outperforming the market, having relative goal settings. Yeah, that's a fair thing. And then people will go boldly beyond what the competition is doing.
I think there is another problem, that if the conditions are stable, target and forecast could be aligned sometimes, but if conditions are constantly unpredictable, then you find you have a low target sometimes or a crazy target, depending on what's happening. So
yeah. Okay, so that's actually beyond budgeting. And then another good tool, I think, in this context can be OKRs. objectives and key results, because they are always saying, this is my broad vision that I've created here with my NABC value proposition, and this is a little key result on the way there. One warning from my side, I have seen so many dysfunctional OKR implementations. This is actually not so easy to do, especially if people who are more on the right-hand side of the spectrum with their mindset, they often misuse OKRs to try to control the organization. And if you do that, it will not work. So what I mean here when I write OKRs, I mean OKRs in the original meaning. Yeah? So we have a bold ambition, we know where we want to go, and we say this is a step towards that direction. And the objective, and I've seen this so often, the objective must contain a statement about the customer. The objective should never be formulated without having the customer in mind. So if the objective doesn't state the customer, it's probably not a good objective. Just as an indicator, as a warning indicator, if your OKR is going down the drain. And then key results, a word about measurements. In this phase here, there is so many things that cannot be measured. And in that sense, very often OKRs, I have seen that teams are trying to measure stuff, then they say, oh, this cannot be measured, and then they define an OKR. Just because it can be measured, they measure things, and what gets measured gets managed. And we tend to miss the point. So instead of only having things that we can measure, like user adoption rate, or how many customers, how many sales did we make, this is, of course, the thing that we can measure, or net promoter scores or something. There's also these immeasurable things. And a good practice around that I found that can be linked to OKRs is indicators of success and indicators of failure. So it's actually a qualitative list of criteria where we say, when we see this, it's rather an indicator that something is not going right. Or when we see this, it's an indicator that things are working out. So it's perfectly okay to have not measurable indicators in this phase. So that's maybe a thing about OKRs. Yeah, and then of course, fast feedback loops, short cycles, and retrospectives are super important tools in this middle ground here. Yeah, and last but not least, yeah, to the right here, you have of course the classic budgeting with cost optimization targets and frames and strict follow-ups and dashboards and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's a look into budgeting, and yeah, that was also the last example I had for this workshop. Are there any final questions or reflections on the thing?
Super interesting. Thank you very much.
Yes, I would say the same.
Me too,
and I
super
will,
interesting.
Yeah, I will ask if you can share with us the results of the slides that you fill with us, because I wasn't able to.
Miriam, but I think she's speaking.
Yes,
Okay.
I was asking if there is any chance, Hendrick, to share with us the slides that you fill with us.
Yes, let's do that. I don't have your email addresses. That's maybe the problem. But what I can do is, you can reach out via LinkedIn. I can send you the stuff. That's maybe one thing, and I can check with the organizers whether it's possible.
Okay, or we can put it here. I don't know if we have a chat here in this room.
I don't know whether I can I upload slides to the chat. That's an interesting question.
There's a chat, but probably
we can left our email there.
Yes,
for
you
you.
can do that as well. No.
I already tried to connect to you in LinkedIn, but nevertheless, I will put here my email. Thank you, Hendrick. It was really, really interesting, and it's good to start to put the things in boxes and start to do these segmentations and think about it and the impacts. Sorry about the noise of my background.
Yeah, no problem. And yeah, play around with it. It's a thinking framework that triggers a discussion. And when you have this discussion in your team, you might have a debate and you might disagree, but this disagreement is actually a good thing, because by sorting this out, you have maybe a common idea of what situation you're in and what might be now the helpful approach. Yeah, Then
yeah, that's why I'm asking you, because I'm planning to do this with our teams.
yes,
It will be a great exercise to do with product owners, with Scrum Masters for sure.
yeah,
Okay, thank you so much for your time.
good.
Thank
you for the active participation. Sorry for the glitches with the technology, but at least in the end it worked. So I don't know what has happened in between.
It was okay.
Thank you, Hendrik. I enjoyed it a lot. It was very structuring for me.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm happy to hear that. And hope to see you on a live conference next year, somewhere around the world. That would be super nice. You know, when it was announced that it will be in Lisbon, Lisbon is such a wonderful city, and I was thinking, like, yeah, I can go to Lisbon maybe. We still have travel restrictions here in Ericsson and so on, and there was no way to come. But maybe next year I will do it. Okay. Good. Then thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And yeah, see you around.